Hello, freaks and fallen ones. My name is TBSKyan, and welcome back to Diablo. Now, as I said in the last video, I'm continuing this little mini-series, which is now just a series, I guess, because, well, it's useful to have a little bit of content that's relatively easy to make and that I can put up on the channel when circumstances do not permit me to make my regular video content, which might be happening a little bit more in the near future. So, last time, I opened the video by saying I wanted to talk about the aesthetics of the original Diablo game, and then I mostly kind of forgot to do that, because I guess I got distracted by other things. So, in this video, let's actually, seriously, for really definitely reals, actually talk about the aesthetics of the original Diablo. And the first thing we should probably do is acknowledge that the aesthetics of the original Diablo are very much a product of the technology that underpins the game, and a product of the technological limitations that underpin the game, and indeed the budgetary limitations that underpin the game. Blizzard was not the multi-billion-dollar juggernaut that we know today when they made Diablo back in 1996. They were still a relatively small company, and they didn't really have the resources to make Diablo as big as it eventually became. So that's part of the reason why Diablo, as I've talked about at length already, is such a relatively smaller, more contained, less outrageous experience, is because, well, they didn't really have the budget to do much more than what they did. And here's one of the little eccentricities of the isometric view system that going on in Diablo, is that occasionally it won't quite understand whether to put something in front of your character or behind them. Like, it knows that the branches out here, yeah, I should be behind those, but once I go in here, oh no, I guess I'm just walking on the tree now. It's a flat texture on the ground. And that's what I mean by limitations. It's a game, like, its game engine and the way that the game is put together has very strong limitations. You can see it on the river here as well, which, while it does have painted reflections painted onto it, which I always thought were quite impressive, just given the circumstances, the river isn't moving. The water isn't doing anything. Yeah. And that's just, that's the way it goes with it. But still, they managed to do something very interesting with the aesthetic that they had. This is Tristram, as you already know. What kind of a place is Tristram? What kind of environment? Where are we? How does it feel to be here? And the first thing I think we should look at is the light, because light is actually extremely important to how the world of Tristram, like the overworld, the hub world that you go back to, how it feels. Now, it's clearly not daytime, because if it was daytime, then we wouldn't have light, spilling out of Ogden's Inn like this. We wouldn't have, that kind of... So it's clearly not daytime. But it doesn't really seem to be the middle of the night either, because there's shadows on the ground. In fact, there are hard shadows on the ground. So where are they coming from? And the answer to that, of course, is, well, it is nighttime, but there is a full moon in the sky. That is why this world looks the way it does, is because it's nighttime, explaining all the drab, dour, dark colors, but also there's a full, bright moon hanging in the sky, casting enough light into the world that things do get to have shadows. It's also fall, as we can tell just by looking at the leaves on the trees, is that some of them have lost most of their leaves, and they're all brown. And while we don't see a lot of leaves on the ground, again, probably technological limitations, that's the world that we enter Tristram into. This is a clear, very, probably slightly chilly fall night with a bright moon in the sky and no daytime in sight. There is no daytime in Tristram. It never becomes daytime. There's no dawn. There is no night. There is only the night, rather. There's no dawn. There's no dusk. There's no twilight. There's no sunset or sundown or anything like that, or sunrise. There is only this eternal cold autumn night. It's not winter, it's not summer, it's not spring, it's fall, it's autumn, it's the end of... And, autumn is also often associated with, decay and things kind of falling apart a little bit, and the world kind of... All the glorious bounty of summer and spring beginning to crumple up, and the world receding into itself to prepare for a long, harsh winter, which, again, ties in very nicely to the sensation of Tristram being this place that used to be less awful, but nowadays is not. So what about Tristram itself, the town? Well, Tristram itself is boring. Like, it's really, really boring. There's absolutely nothing of any interest here whatsoever. All of the houses are just these little thatched roof houses, and even the inn is just kind of small and not really that impressive. There's no impressive architecture. There's no grand construction statements. There's just a bunch of farmhouses sitting around a central square with a fountain, and it looks like a place where absolutely nothing happens, right? It looks like a place where absolutely nothing goes on. And the mod has added several townsfolk, or rather it's added Tremaine the priest, and it's put Wirt, rather than being somewhere out here, outside of town, he's now standing here closer to town center, which is just, more convenient and makes him easier to find. And they've added Guide from Diablo 2, who retains one of his voice lines from Diablo 2, which is just a way to get the gambling system into the game. That's just kind of, I've never been a huge fan of it, but it is what it is. So what is the temperature like? What does it look like if you sat on the ground in Tristram? What would the ground feel like? Well, it looks like it would feel kind of hard and a little bit cold and moist and not very welcoming. It looks like it would be kind of cold because all the colors are cold. Tristram is a very cold place in terms of its color expression. You've got lots of blues, lots of sort of drab greens, lots of browns, which adds to the feeling of autumn and fall, but it also tells us something about that this is not like a nice place to be on your own, that if you were to be here, you would want to wear a big coat and maybe, a blanket or something to keep yourself warm, except in certain places. Look at the light pouring out of Adria's shack. This warm, inviting, bright, nice light. This bright orange, welcoming hearth at the core of her shack, just kind of feeling very welcoming, feeling very human. And that's something that Tristram does a lot. It plays a lot with its light, which is why I brought that up immediately. Look at the light spilling out of Ogden's tavern, him standing in it there, welcoming you into the Tavern of the Rising Sun, the hearth pouring out of Griswold's, presumably his forge. The same thing with Pepin's house. Look at Pepin's house, but like the warm, gentle light spilling out of it, and you can see that he's got carpets, like he's got rugs on the floor, gorgeous carpets by the look of it too. So all the environment of Tristram is cold, unwelcoming, kind of clammy and unpleasant, but the houses, the places where the people live, are bright and full of warmth. And this is not exactly genius level stuff. Like, this is sort of the very basic, if you want to establish a sensation of an unwelcoming, harsh environment, contrasted against, the people are what makes it worth being here. And also what makes the place worth saving is that there are people here who add warmth to the world, who add bright light and kindness to the world. Well, this is like the basic 101 way to do it. Like, this is how I would do it if I was given the task of creating a video game. That would be the obvious first thing I'd go, oh yeah, that's a simple way to get that done. So there's those forms of light. We have the cold, bright, white, unnatural, or rather, cold, bright, white, natural light of the moon shining down on the place, giving us this cold autumn night. We have the warm, welcoming, nurturing, human orange light of the houses of Tristram. And then there is a third form of light. And here I'm just going to crank the walk speed all the way up. Then there is the third form of light in Tristram. The red, blood red light that doesn't so much shine on the ground as it seems to stain the ground with blood pouring out of the corrupted cathedral. Something I've mentioned multiple times before already is that Diablo is ultimately a game about the haunting of Tristram. It's a ghost story in a lot of ways. It's The Exorcist by way of a gothic hack and slash. And nowhere is that expressed more powerfully than in this. The bright, unpleasant, deadly light of hell radiating out of the cathedral at the heart of town, marking it out as the source of all the evil there is in Tristram. The evil is not coming from the natural environment, because the natural environment doesn't really have a color. It's just white moonlight shining on the world. Crisp, clear, sharp, not necessarily warm, but not hostile either. unlike this, which is tremendously hostile. This is light that says, we've got people in here conducting rituals to summon demons into the world. Like this, if you go in here, you're gonna die. This is light that says, we're coming for you, and we are killing all of you. Bright red, the light of hell itself, pouring out of the cathedral. And that is just really well put together, and it's something that, once again, to harp on the rest of the Diablo series, this kind of considered use of the lighting, of the aesthetics of the place, because in Diablo 2, the rogue camp is just like a camp. It's just a place they set up because they got driven out of their monastery, fair enough. But then there's Lut Gholein, which is not at all a place like Tristram in any way. It's this shining jewel of the south, I think Kane calls it, or is it Warwick? Warriv, the caravan leader, calls it like the jewel of the east or something like that. Which is this big, sprawling, Middle Eastern looking city where the evil that is there, as we talked about in the last video, it just kind of, the wildernesses and the places where you go to do the gameplay have very little connection to the places that you return to sell your loot. You just kind of go out into the wilderness and do stuff. And that extends into the ways in which the dungeons are designed, because as we head into the cathedral for the first time,
this place has been fouled.
The sanctity of this place has been fouled. Yes, thank you for your contribution there. Take a look at the place that we head into. It's a place where certainly you'll find some blood on the ground here and there, indicating, you know, the deaths of the villagers who were led in there by Lazarus. But look at sort of... Oh boy, we're going to have to clear out a few people before I can get some peace and quiet to talk. Not that they can hit me right now. I think I'm incredibly over-leveled to be here. Look at the architecture of this place. Look at how it looks. Like, the floors are all, you know, paved with stone. And look at the walls. Like, look at just this clean, vaulting, very considered, beautifully built architecture. It looks like if you went to any church in, like, a Northern European country, like any Gothic church in Germany or something, and you went down the stairs, you could find a place that looked somewhat like this, right? With these vaulting arches holding things up, and these, you know, the occasional large vaulted rooms, and, you know, little libraries and stuff like that. You know, where monks might hang out and do some work every once in a while. That's what it looks like here. And that's something perhaps that we should also get into a little bit, which is the influence of Christianity on Diablo, because that's something that's been, interestingly, diminishing as the series has gone on, which makes sense, because, like, anytime you include any religious imagery from any religion into your game, you're courting controversy, and it's not necessarily always worth it. But Diablo 1 doesn't shy away from Christian iconography. In fact, you can see the shield I've got when I'm wearing this particular armor set has a cross on it, and perhaps even more explicitly, the blood red cross is being projected onto the ground by the crosses, the crucifixes at the side of this church, which are pouring red light into the environment. There's no artifice here. This is a Northern European Christian-inspired mythology, and that comes through as well in some of the backstory to the original Diablo, which was... While Diablo, like, anytime you talk about heaven and hell, you're inevitably going to get into Christianity territory, or any of the any of the religions based on, originally based on Judaism, like Islam and Christianity and so on. You're always going to get into a little bit of that, because that's sort of where that comes from, but in a much more explicit way. As you can see, there's, like, lots of crucifixes here in the churchyard. This is Northern European Catholicism / Protestantism that is being used as a symbol in this game, and it's not necessarily being used as a symbol for good. You will remember that one of the major antagonists of this game is the Archbishop Lazarus. Archbishops exist in not a lot of religions. And they have a very specific role there.
Or are there zombies down here?
And so there's a lot of influence of Christianity in this game. And that's something that's been diminishing. If you think about Diablo 2, for example, Tyrael shows up there. We get to see what an angel looks like in the Diablo universe, and they don't have wings. Well, they do. They have these, like, light tentacles that fly out of their back and which can sort of stand in for wings, and they're really neat. Like, I've always liked those. They're really neat sort of visual way to differentiate itself from straight-up Christian mythology. That's very creative, very interesting. But it's also a way to distance the game from the explicit mythology of Christianity itself, to take away the feathered wings that are such an iconic part of what we think of as angel aesthetic in Western mythology. And it's something that also happens, I think, when we think about the monster designs of Diablo, also continuously, I think, seem to remove themselves from the Christian, Northern European demon mythology inspired look that they had going on in Diablo. Like, look at these little fallen ones. These are imps, these are goblins, these are the little devils with, forks that would hang around Satan's feet and poke at the damned that we see in Christian-inspired imagery. We face skeletons down here. Skeletons holding, shields and armaments that are unmistakably European in their expression. We loot sarcophagi, especially if we headed to, if you remember, the tomb of King Leoric, is very explicitly modeled after the tombs of Christian kings. Not in any specific referential way, but that's what that place looked like. And Leoric as a monster also looked very specifically like a dead Christian king, with a giant great sword and a crown on his head, raising the armies of the dead to fight for him. Like, all of that is so very Northern European Christianity inspired. And that's something that's been falling away a little bit, I think, in later Diablo games, where a lot more of the monsters have become, rather than being associated specifically with the mythology of Northern Europe, they've become much more, let's design them based on flora and fauna of the regular world. Like, that's the thing that happened certainly in Diablo 2, is that you started encountering Wendigos, for instance, are a monster that exists in the first act, like these big hairy brutes that are based on sort of essentially yeti creatures of some sort. Much more flora and fauna starts to creep in, which is also something that happens very much in Diablo 3, where you encounter a lot more creatures that, rather than being demons spawned from hell, are sort of positioned as being just part of the flora and fauna of the world that has been corrupted by the presence of, the various evils that, oh boy, that haunt the world. And that's something that's not really so much happening here. Like, in Diablo, you fight demons. You fight demons and monsters. You do not especially fight naturally occurring creatures. All of this, everything that you put a sword in Diablo came from hell at some point. Which again, I think ties into the idea that the original Diablo is a story about a haunting, a possession of these ghosts and poltergeists that have infested this area and must be cleared out in literal exorcism, rather than you are adventuring into the wilderness of this world to explore and find stuff, which is much more part of Diablo 2's ethos, is that it wanted to expand the world of Sanctuary. It wanted to expand on the world, and I think that's fair enough. Like, that's not really a thing I'm going to criticize it for, but that also leads to the game, I feel, having a less powerful cohesion between its monsters as representatives of the evil that haunts the town of Tristram, like the skeletons and the zombies being clear representations of death, and death that haunts Tristram more than perhaps anything else. We have the gargoyles, which again, very heavily tied into Northern European Gothic architecture. The gargoyles, gargoyles specifically are ornaments on buildings that are meant to divert water away from the walls, which is why they're called gargoyles. It comes from gargle, the same root as gargle, like because they had water spouts in their mouths. But they're called grotesques, more specifically as an architectural feature, and they were sort of meant to be reminders of the power of hell, reminders of the terror of damnation, and sometimes used to ward away evil spirits from holy places, which is why you'll find them on a lot of churches and a lot of the old Gothic buildings. So a lot of the monsters in Diablo 1 have a very direct connection to the kinds of... God damn it, just die. you know, the supernatural powers of North European myth. Just die, would you? God damn it. North European mythology, and they have a relationship to the town and its misery itself. I don't want to overpraise Diablo 1 as this perfectly coherent, cohesive, beautiful game full of everything makes perfect sense when you put it in context, but most of it works together very well within sort of the concept that I've laid out here. Which again, because the monster designs in Diablo 2 were much more about expanding the ecology and the world of Sanctuary. Again, exploring the world of Sanctuary is very much part of the conceit of Diablo 2. Is very much it's supposed to be this globe-trotting thing where you travel across the world to all these different places and environments and get better acquainted with, oh boy, with what this world even is. Which, you know, it's fair enough. But it means that the monsters don't have as much of a... Ow. Ow, okay, that's bad. That's really bad, in fact. I need some more room to maneuver. Thank you. Good grief. Those were troublesome. The monsters in Diablo 1 have a thematic connection to the concepts and conceits of the rest of the game, and I always liked that a lot. And that's something that later games have sometimes consciously, in the case of Diablo 2, for instance, decided not to include, decided not to bring into the game, and in the case of Diablo 3, seems to have fundamentally misunderstood. And I think in the next video we are actually going to be playing a bit of Diablo 2. Yeah, Diablo 2, so that I can specifically take a look at, like, why doesn't it work for me as well in that game as it does in this one, and explore a little bit more about how the aesthetics of the base camps don't really, and the feelings of the base camps don't really line up so much with the environments that you're exploring. And maybe we'll look at Diablo 3 as well, and just how profoundly the aesthetics of the dungeon design in that game don't line up at all with what the rest of the game is trying to say. Anyway, if you enjoy these Diablo videos, well, you should feel very free to subscribe to the channel and to like the video, and you know, it all algorithm stuff, it all helps. There's a bell icon, yada yada. You've been on YouTube before, you know what to do. I also have a Patreon that if you want to help me make these videos and make sure that I can, the Diablo series, I'll be honest, doesn't get quite as many views as other stuff I make. And that's fair enough because it began its life as filler content, and to a certain extent it's still filler content, but Patreon is a thing that helps me feel safe and confident in making stuff like this that is a little bit more niche, that doesn't appeal to as many people, but which is sort of helpful to me personally, gives me some stability and sort of like, so if you want to support the Patreon, that's very helpful, or if you have another creator that you know who also, you know, struggles sometimes with stability especially, consider going to their Patreons and supporting them, because it's very helpful to us. If you're not able to do that, of course, don't worry about it. I don't know a single creator, myself included, who would ever get angry at their audience for not supporting them financially. It's completely okay. It's completely voluntary. Apart from that, if you don't like this video, then, you know, there's a dislike button that you can click on, and I won't blame you. Like, if you click on enough dislike buttons, like, the drop rate is a little bit shitty, but eventually, if you click on enough of them, they'll drop a ring, and you can take that ring to a vendor, and they'll identify it for you, and there's like a 1 in 256 chance that it'll have a stat that increases all of your abilities, and that one you can use in multiplayer. People use it a lot to trade with. So, you know, if you're looking for that one, if you've had trouble with the drop rates, you can click the dislike button. Maybe you get lucky. Thank you very much for watching.